Coming up, the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks will meet in the NBA Finals. And hey, for a lot of different reasons, it's basically like the Brooklyn Nets accomplishment. We dive in on Kyrie Irving, Jayson Tatum, and all the narratives coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And Doug, you know it, I know it, the world knows it. Even if the Brooklyn Nets aren't involved in the postseason, even if they're not going to the finals, it's about the Brooklyn Nets.
Oh, it's all about the Brooklyn Nets. And frankly, the way that these finals have shaped up here, both teams have the Nets to thank for it. And as I said a little earlier today, it's a little nice,
I think,
it's a little something called manners. Like if you want to, like maybe a little thank you or something like that for facilitating the Kyrie Irving trade, years ago, facilitating the trade that ends up landing Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown in Boston. And as someone just commented to me earlier, maybe the Rockets are up next, like maybe if we're just talking about the Nets.
Maybe that's the legacy. Is that the legacy for the Nets franchise? We
I
are very heavily involved in winning pedigree, just not for our organization.
It just doesn't happen here. But in terms of facilitating, in terms of trading things pennies on the dollar to facilitate championship level teams in other places, Nets are all for it. But jokes aside, the NBA final, well, maybe not jokes aside, because we're probably going to make a few more jokes as we go here, but the NBA finals are set, and it's hard not to see how the Nets have had some influence here. Kyrie Irving, one season removed from being in a Brooklyn Nets uniform, and he is on his way to possibly winning another championship. In Boston, obviously Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are the byproducts of the ill-fated trade the Nets made years and years ago. Admittedly, not under this current regime. So they don't have, it wasn't these guys that did it, but that ended up landing them the draft picks for the KG piece and the Paul Pierce piece that lands Tatum and Brown. So funny how it works out. Look, it's sports. This is just the way it goes sometimes. But Nets fans who already probably feel a decent sting from it not working out when the Nets tried to go all in, now watch it play out in maybe the worst case imaginable with the Celtics and the Mavericks.
Well, you know what? I just thought I was thinking about it too, as far as Kyrie Irving, because we've talked about it, mentioned him a couple of times here in passing over the last couple of weeks. Just there's been a narrative shift, obviously, around him, and everything that was chaotic for both the Brooklyn Nets organization and him as an individual, that all went away, and everything has worked out for him in Dallas. But I'll rewind it back to the time of making those trades. Remember, the trade to Phoenix with Kevin Durant was so easy because new ownership, they'll give you whatever you want. But there was a level of spitefulness associated with the Brooklyn Nets choosing to trade Kyrie to Dallas, maybe not for as much as you could have gotten. We don't know how many teams really would have been involved. We've heard now the speculation about the Lakers and other moves that could have been made, but the Nets didn't want to take certain players back. It's a reminder that sometimes when you make the move that isn't solely based on basketball reasons and the best path forward for your organization, you can find yourself looking over the Dallas Mavericks and saying, we put them in a great championship opportunity, obviously. Maybe that doesn't matter from the inside looking out, but also from an asset standpoint, right? The Phoenix situation is wait with bated breath for how valuable those picks could be. In Dallas, yeah, you have picks from them, but you look forward now, they're going to probably be a high-level competitive team. So trying to remove the emotion out of it is probably always a prudent thing when it comes to making those type of high-level decisions.
Yeah, for sure seems like there was emotion involved. I mean, that situation went like as poorly as possible, obviously, right? Too. And we're trying to like not rewrite what the narrative actually was. And I think that there's like, it's easy to do here in hindsight is to sort of like misremember how all this all happens, right? And with Kyrie, it was a full on dovetailing of like all the worst things that could happen. And he did himself no favors either. Like, I think everyone and everything was culpable here in this thing. There were so many things that were like externally outside of people's control. There were plenty of things that were in his control. I mean, he had times where he took off, he missed games for like unknown reasons 2 seasons before, right? There was issues around injury stuff. He said he was the coach basically around Steve Nash, right? Like, there was obviously the posting that really the controversial stuff that ended up really fast forwarding it. I mean, at least me, like, I was even on his side sort of like with the COVID stuff, because I thought like he did probably got like, that was like just bad timing and geography, right? Like, for like teams, it didn't affect every team, it affected him. So like, I think that like I really think that all sides screwed up here. The Nets offered him an extension with it had stipulations on it, right? Like, I don't know, and that probably maybe it was just never going to get done. There too much bad blood anyway. All this is being said is I really do think everyone should be a little careful about placing all the blame on one side or the other. I think everyone screwed up. The media screwed up too. Like, they had some people, the wrong people in the wrong place that just needled this thing to death also. And maybe that's just been less of a thing in Dallas, where it's like the media is not as obstructive. And I think there's definitely media members for sure that stoke the fire for their own kind of like stuff.
Yeah. Oh, guess what? Yeah. For
sure.
And everything else that you need, right? You have a job to do. However you choose to go about doing it, it can.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying like even that the Nets kind of ran a little unlucky, because just I think different media members wouldn't have agendized this thing as badly. So this is all to say, it all went bad. Everyone kind of screwed up. And your original point is correct. The Nets probably should have just like tried to get the most value and hope that emotions didn't get in the way there.
And more than anything, it is. I mentioned Brooklyn Nets from that standpoint, just because you turn around and you look where things are in Dallas and the opportunity they have and what it will stand to benefit potentially for the Brooklyn Nets. And that includes, by the way, Dorian Finney-Smith and trading or not trading him and trying to turn him into an asset. That can be a fumble on the Brooklyn Nets part, as we've talked about extensively. But, it's funny too. It's not just everything that went on with his time in Brooklyn. It's also the lead up to that. Kyrie Irving, as a NBA personality, was coming off of a bad string, right? Doesn't want to be in Cleveland, then ends up moving away from Boston. And again, these are non-judgmental things. The same when we talk about Kevin Durant. I never really judged him when he said he wanted to leave OKC and wanted to go to Golden State. I didn't really judge him when he wanted to leave Golden State. Why? Because he was going to come to Brooklyn. But then when he ends up in Phoenix, and now that narrative builds. So it is that kind of thing where, like, sports uniquely, unlike maybe some other fields or industries, especially when you talk about unprecedented circumstances around the COVID era, for the entire country. It's like, oh, here's something totally new that's happening here. You just have to sort it out in real time. By the way, there's also this thing that can't stop going on around you. And everyone at a high and low level, on a professional and personal level, gets tossed into the mix of this. So in the end of it all, Kyrie Irving is going to the NBA Finals. And I do wonder how fans will react to this. I guess that's really what we're getting down to with him before we turn over to the Boston side a little bit, is how are fans going to respond to this? Me personally, and I think you as well, I looked at it as you were a really hard person to support when you were here. Doesn't mean I think you were wrong about on every level. But I look at it as, yeah, you're an incredible talent. And that's all that I love to see when it's not something that creates issues potentially for the franchise that we cover or that we talk about on a daily basis. Go watch the games. He's one of the best players in the game. And it's awesome to see him go to the finals. So I think you and I would be aligned in, I'm completely removed from everything that went on for the Brooklyn Nets in terms of whether or not I should care that Kyrie Irving now benefits from being traded away from Brooklyn and ending up playing with Luka Doncic, obviously one of the elite talents, and maybe winning a second championship in short order.
All right, well, I'll respond to that in a second, because I think there's some more stuff to flesh out. I want to talk about the Boston side of it too, and talk about how, this is if you're a Nets fan, this is a tough finals to root for, or at least which side to pick. Talk about that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. Look, PrizePicks is daily fantasy made so easy. You can get in off the finals action here over on PrizePicks. You went up to 100 times your money. It's the world's best players taking the game to a new level during this basketball postseason. Like I said, 100 extra money on PrizePicks with as few as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. You got basketball, you got hockey out there, you got MLB. Obviously, it's America's #1 sports app. All you're doing over on PrizePicks is you're going more or less on the PrizePicks projections. Basketball, look, that's points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. MLB is like strikeouts, home runs, all the good stuff, all the stats that you love. More or less in the PrizePicks projections, not wrangling with salaries, not going up against sharks in the water. It's you versus PrizePicks. You can 100x your money. Download the app, the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Download the PrizePicks app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Going to get a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we continue the Locked On Nets episode, talking about the NBA Finals, talking about Kyrie Irving, talking about Jayson Tatum, about Jaylen Brown, about all the ways in which the Brooklyn Nets are not benefiting from some of their own narratives that they have created for the NBA. You mentioned maybe a little bit more on Kyrie Irving. The last thing that I'll just mention on it from a high level and how I feel about watching him in the finals is, again, the time frame. There's specific things around personality, contract demands, expectations that I think every player is going to, at his level, get into. And the Brooklyn Nets were going to hold non-basketball related factors in order with that, specifically around the idea of personal choices and personal opinions on things. It typically is not required for individuals inside an organization or players on the court to have to express, stand on, and then defend those points of view. And I think that Kyrie Irving is that exact personality that you would hate. Again, nothing on him or anybody. It's like you'd hate to have him have to be the guinea pig in one of those scenarios. And that's exactly what happened in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah,
that's the worst storm of all events.
Again, if it was like the El Paso Nets, I think like none of this ever happens, right? Like it's just the wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong personality, and all this stuff that ends up happening. And I look, for when it comes to a rooting perspective, I personally, it doesn't really matter to me. I know there's gonna be fans out there that don't like that. I know there's tons of Kyrie stands out there that want to hear it one way. There's Nets fans that are like very anti-Kyrie that want to hear it the other way. It gets a little tougher when you throw the Celtics in the mix because no one wants to see that happen either. I think from a fan perspective, like I guess I just don't. It just doesn't affect me the exact same way. And I know that, again, like to a certain segment of fan, that will sound like some kind of like foreign language, but it just, I guess, like the emotional level. It's funny. The emotional level, I definitely am further along there than I used to be when it comes to this, because I actually kind of distanced myself emotionally from a lot of stuff. Doing the podcast every day, watching the Nets, wanting them to do well, has like sort of reinvigorized that around like sort of certain aspects of fandom. But the grudge holding piece, which I know is a part of it, just doesn't. It's like, I don't know. I'm just not open for business on that. And so I mostly just want to see this go 7 games and go down to the end. And I think that's a very cool prospect, because these teams are built uniquely to have that happen around like sort of different mechanics. And I think from that standpoint, like if Kyrie hit the buzzer beater to win the championship, that'd be cool. As far as I'm concerned. If he missed it, that'd be fine too. Like I don't think it just like, it doesn't play for me like that.
No, it's funny too. There's something in regards to Kyrie and the Mavericks before we turn over to Boston. But in sports, the idea is you turn the page. It's the next play. But we know as fans, it's hard to let go of those things. It's hard to separate from those things. Like Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, any of these guys, they're looking for the best opportunity to play, the best spot for them to be able to do what they want to do. Organizations are looking for, okay, what's the next chapter of our journey? If you think that either side of these narratives, and for Boston as well, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown don't reflect back on, man, I wonder if Boston never made those trades and got those picks, would I have been a Brooklyn Net? Those things don't play on athletes' minds. So it's always something interesting when it comes to fandom. And as you say, over the life of the podcast, it becomes a little bit harder with certain things to let go of it wholly and completely. From a narrative standpoint, the Dallas Mavericks going to the finals. I mean, listen, Kyrie Irving, and he said it in post-game press conferences through these playoffs already, he's there to try to help Luka get his first championship. I mean, talking about a guy who's still only 25 years old, winning his first championship. Kyrie Irving would win his second championship. And in theory, you look in the Western Conference, it's always going to be highly competitive. But this team definitely jumped whether or not they took the risk, quote unquote, of bringing in Kyrie Irving a year ago, it didn't work out in the first season together. Then all of a sudden, the second season, it flipped over immediately. And it did have me thinking about how teams can turn these things over quickly. It does require to have an elite talent, but your expectation level can go from nothing to really something inside of that degree. Never the championship for the Brooklyn Nets right now, but I think the Mavs are a good example of that.
I think all the teams that were kind of, here were pretty good examples of it. Like Minnesota made it further than most people thought they could. OKC probably exceeded expectations by just a little bit this season on a timeline, a little faster than they thought they were going to be. Mostly because I think some of these other teams took steps further back faster than some. The Phoenix took a step back further. Took a further step back than people thought they were going to. The Lakers clearly did too. Like there's other teams here that just didn't progress at the same level. Warriors. There's a lot of examples here that just like they're headed in the wrong direction.
The darling of last year, not nearly don't live up to the hype this season.
Yeah, for sure. And so, and even like Boston, they're like, okay, they're kind of keep getting to the doorstep, can't get over. They traded for Staps. They make a tough move in trading, a fan favorite guy in Marcus Smart for a guy in Kristaps Porzingis, and it was like, well, that was the right move. And now he's been hurt, but he's going to come back here for the finals. And that team could be a powerhouse. We just don't even realize it. Sort of like they kind of played with their food a lot in some of these games, and ended up having them be closer than you would have thought. They were also missing like arguably their second best player, like for the whole of the playoffs too. And I don't know. It's just it is a good reminder that it takes smart building. You need to have elite talents. Like the Nets do not have that. It requires you having a superstar. All these teams we're talking about have superstars on their team. But if your path is try to get one and then build something, like a lot of the more teams probably are closer than they think. And I think these are probably decent reflections of that like smart moves can get you there.
And by the way, specifically to Boston, this would be the way you connect it back to the decision for the Brooklyn Nets to trade Kevin Durant and get these Phoenix picks, right? What does it turn into? Now, Kevin Durant at the time, better player for value than what the Nets were getting years ago in Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, but you traded away these future assets, and now the Nets hold those future assets. So if you're on the side of keep the Phoenix picks dry, don't make any big splashy trades and wait it out, then you look at Boston and go, yeah, let's do to Phoenix what Boston did to us. Take our picks, turn them into key core pieces that have now been a part of that team for years and have made them a consistent deep playoff run team over the last 4 or 5 seasons. Like that's the squint and see the nice, easy dream path forward here. You need things to break for you. You still need to get high in the lottery in those years. You still have to have deep draft classes in those years, right? But that's one way that you can still see this working out for the Brooklyn Nets and Boston. Like you're being stared in the face here about what could have been, and then also that what could be in another 2 or 3 years if you're willing to wait that long. That's the hard part if you're a fan for the Nets. You're watching what could have been your team. Like, in theory, on paper, it's like we could have drafted those players. We could have had that team, and we could have been building around Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and making margin moves and tough decisions, but always being this team. They talk about, can they get over the hump and get to the finals and win a championship? Let's keep talking about whether or not either of these paths here that we're seeing for these two teams in the finals present a blueprint in the short term for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment. As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, do want to let you know that if you've been watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, make the switch over to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Oh, you know it. It's your team, and it's every day. Doug, do we take anything away from these finals? Can the Nets learn anything from what these teams have accomplished here? We've mentioned Derek Lively before in Dallas, rookie player, get him developed, have him contribute. I mean, what would be your best takeaways for Brooklyn looking at these two teams?
Well, okay. I mean, besides the obvious of like have the best players, right? But part of team building should be thinking about what are the best mechanics to get a superstar, right? Like this is what most teams need to be thinking about all the time is like, what are the best ways to get one of these guys, right? You need one of these guys. They have to be among the 10 best players in the game. And you just have no shot. Like if you don't have one of those guys, like you don't have any shot at getting there. That's it. It's just like the way the NBA is built. Like, and these teams like Tatum, Doncic, and it helps if you have like one in the top 10 and then like 2 in the top 15 or something like that, or like 2 in the top 18 or whatever the number is going to end up being. If you don't have that, it's going to be really tough. So the Nets, I do think, need to think about, what is the best path to doing it, if that's the goal. See, the other thing too is where we are is, there's 30 teams, only one can win a championship. We can also talk about teams here that would consider their seasons to be overwhelming successes that did not make the championship. The Pacers,
of course,
the Knicks, right? Like these two teams, their fans bases are walking away and be like, that was great. Yeah, it sucks to lose, but in terms of where we thought we were going to be at the beginning of the season, that was awesome. And there is something to be said for seasons like that, where you just exceed expectations and don't win the championship. You're like, hey, there's only 1 in 30 can win the championship. And that's going to be tough. Odds are against us. But there is a higher percentage on just having fun and being watchable and, winning more, winning 10 to 15% more than anyone thought you were going to do. That does have value. And I wonder if like that should be more. We have not talked about that part of the process as much. It's been like, for me at least, it's been like sort of championship or bust. But I do wonder if the Nets could just stand to just have a couple seasons where it's just like, hey, it turned out better than we thought. and that's been sorely missing for so many years.
And on just on the Western Conference Finals, the Timberwolves right now, it ends absolutely brutally, and they look like they're checked out in the final game. But they exceeded expectations, so they should be able to look back on this season and say, "Hey, we really moved the needle on what we could accomplish." On the net side of it, I would say I would have been happy. I would be happy for them just to be in the mix and it finished better than we thought it was going to. The hard part again for that one is this past season and a half, right, where the sample size doesn't give you the return you want. You don't make the play-in tournament, and that makes it a little more difficult. One other thing,
it's been 4 seasons of it. It's been 4 seasons.
Well, yeah, I know. And then there's a superstar era, let alone that disappointment. Which I think maybe that's interesting too. We may reflect on that over the course of this off season. Like looking back on it now, how much what was more disappointing? Because I know that we wanted the superstars to be successful, but ironically, they never, outside of that toe on the line, the injury playoffs. Like we all know that's disappointing because that's a super team and they're supposed to win it. But ironically, because they never came close, like remotely close to winning it, it's like it's almost like there's less disappointment there because they weren't in the Eastern Conference Finals. Toe on the line, didn't get there. They didn't go to the finals and not win the championship, and then it falls apart. I know that is the more disappointing, 100%. But now every fan is looking at it as, but what's even more disappointing is trading away the superstars and then having, awful players, bad players, non-competitive players, no control of your picks. Like the net result of not winning with the superstars, I think, is starting to build as more aggravating in the fan base's mind. Does that make sense?
Well, it would be peak Nets content to do episodes about what's been the most disappointing thing, right? Like, so like when we just make a list,
probably a month worth of shows, though. We got to really think about that. We got to space those out a bit.
It'd just be so perfect. It'd be like, let's just do stuff around what's been. It's all been bad. It's all been bad. Now, let's make a list of all the worst stuff. No, it's like
top 10 I get it. Worst things to happen.
And this is what I mean about just trying to bank some small wins. Like the Nets are so far away from banking, so many years removed now from banking small wins. And I do wonder if that just has to be part of, and by the way, to some ways this, bank small wins is kind of tear it down and then gradually, bank some small stuff. Another way is to just trade for some stuff and just be better. Like Donovan Mitchell plus Bridges. I'm just making this up now, but like Donovan Mitchell plus Bridges plus Claxton, Cam Johnson probably goes out in that trade. Maybe, something else happens and now they just win, 48 games or something like that. Or 45 games. That's a lot too.
40,
but
and
that, and make the playoffs and it's fun, right? Like, because we're just so far. It's like very difficult to sometimes understand the path they should take because we're so far removed from like feeling great about how the things ended, whether it's not winning the championship because everyone got hurt, whether it's everyone checks out getting swept by Boston, whether it's getting crushed by Philly. Although even that maybe was like, okay, well, maybe they're going to be okay next year. Then this year it's like a massive disappointment. And it's just like, hey, just like every iteration of the team has been disappointing. So can we just get like a small win? Forget the championship. Let's just get some small wins here.
And it's funny too, because you mentioned about Boston and Porzingis trade. They also brought in Derek White a few years ago and then chose to retain him, and he made a big difference into how they were constructed. And there's been other moves for them as well. But I think about looking over at, and I'll tie it back to Brooklyn. When you look over at Dallas now and you say, so obviously they got Kyrie Irving, like we know that was the massive one, but they also added PJ Washington. They also added brought in Daniel Gafford, who all of a sudden, if you look back over their roster and you think about the Maxi Klebers, the Josh Greens, the Tim Hardaway Juniors of the world, these are guys that had much more significant roles or were looked at as needing to become more significant contributors to move the needle. Instead, once they got Kyrie, it was, well, now we have Kyrie, we have Luka. We're not going to question about whether or not that works. We are going to start to question what are the best pieces in and around it. And for the Brooklyn Nets, we just had this conversation around Cam Thomas. Now, Cam Thomas is not on the level of Kyrie Irving or Luka Doncic yet. That's fine. But you can't have that conversation around Mikal Bridges. And I think that was another reality here. It's not you play the last half of that season after the trade and you go, okay, now what kind of pieces do we tweak and bring in around Mikal Bridges? It's what pieces will we bring in to see if Mikal Bridges can fit around them, right? Because he's a supporting player, not a lead player. And that's the biggest difference here for Brooklyn. They can't make those little tweaks right now unless go listen to, as we've been telling you a lot this offseason, another A-plus episode about Cam Thomas and the need to build around him. If that's the direction you go, then start to think about it that way. Even if the ceiling of expectations is just being a playoff team, play in tournament and maybe make the playoffs and, try to compete in the first round. You can have a version of that team using the same principles. It just won't have the high expectations that you get when you have a superstar as the centerpiece.
Yeah, I mean, if they went into this season, honestly, if they just brought this team into the season and went 500, I think you'd be like, nice. As we waited for like one more season, if it was just based on the same team we saw last year, new coach, marginal moves, but everything kind of has to stay the same because they couldn't make a trade and they're kind of stuck with the Simmons contract. You know what I mean? They're just stuck in a place here, not be able to do stuff. If they went 500 with that team, I think I'd probably be like, all right, like, look, they can't really improve their draft stock, right? Like there's, they have the pick, but this is a swap. And so I think I probably would be like, hey, for the time being, that's just fine. That is based on last year's team, that would exceed expectations. Is it a loser mentality? I mean, I'm sure it could be couched that way a little bit, but that's just where this team is right now. And you don't have Luka, you don't have Ant, you don't have Shea, you don't have Jayson Tatum, you don't have any of these guys, Giannis, Jokic. Like, there's a lot of really, really great players out there in the league. You have to go through all of them to like really win championships. The Nets don't have them and they don't have a path to get them. Okay, that's fine. Now, at this point, that's the reality. How can they go into this year and gain some marginal, like, organizational wins? That just might be the thing that we're kind of just looking at.
And I'll tell you right now, it's a conversation for another day. Expectations of the season. If it's Cam Thomas taking the next step, if it's Noah Clowney emerging as a starter, if it's Dariq Whitehead coming back healthy and showing you anything at all, those narratives tie into like a 500 team, and those things happen, and maybe you get back in the first round and get another young player. That's fun. Another version of this team where it's Dorian Finney-Smith, Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, and all the veterans, and you're a 500 team that gets bounced in the first round of the playoffs or loses in the play-in tournament, and those are the key figures around it. That's not going to be fun. That's actually going to be probably infuriating, I think, for a lot of Nets fans.
And by the way, and it's just sometimes it's just those shifts, right? It's like these small differences. The small difference in the story tells a big difference in the ending, right? And I think that that's exactly what the Nets are looking at. Like your first version of that, you can really start thinking about how it can grow. The other version of it, you're thinking, there's a reason I'm bald, and I can't go too much balder here, but like, I guess the Nets could always try to push the limits here and like that. And it just is the difference in narrative. Okay. We are going to get out of here. Much appreciated, everyone that's rocking with us all through the playoffs. Got a few days off here before the finals start, but we'll be coming at you. We'll probably actually start hitting up some draft coverage. Actually, the Nets bringing in some players for workouts. There's increasing speculation that they're going to trade into this draft, which we're excited to, really hoping they do, because there's a lot of cool draft coverage that we're going to plan on doing. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience. That is one Julius Caesar.
Oh, Julie, one of the all-time great posts. We're back again. 2 more. All right, next week, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.